there's a couple of kind of myths or ideas around HR that we want to push back against, we want to dispel. Keith earlier said, hey, HR's compliance focused or, employee paperwork focused, this stuff you got to do to stay out of jail. And, I'm not going to disagree that that's a part of the job. But what most companies overlook is that their HR should be their labor multiplier. If you're going to spend $100,000 a month on your labor pool, how much of that can you spend to multiply the effectiveness of that labor?
The topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show, the home of Googlization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy shift going on in the world of business, technology, and HR. Here's your host, Ira Wolf, and co-host Keith Campagna.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, and Googlization Nation to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show. We are entering the second half of 2020, and I've been doing a lot of work with putting this course together. I might have mentioned it on an earlier show on change management for a new graduate program at a local college. And so doing a lot of research, a lot of reading, and came up with this question. Been digging deep into something called Blue Ocean Strategy. Many of you may be familiar with it. Also following up on one of our previous guests, Charlene Lee, who has a great new book about the disruption mindset. And the one question that came up that just seems striking, and that's what we'll be talking a little bit about that today, is what seems most odd during this time? And I don't even know where to begin. If we look back over the last 4 months, there is a whole lot of stuff that seems pretty odd. And I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg. And, we talk a lot about the crazy shift going on and when the shift hits your plan. But there's a lot of odd stuff that just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. So we're going to be talking about that today. And to get through that, we all need to become better at questioning some of the things we do, why we used to do the things we did, what's going to work going forward, and also really develop a lot of new processes for that. And being in the people business, we're going to talk on people processes today. And our guest who will be joining us shortly is Rhamy Alejeal. And he had just interviewed me a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks, on his show, a podcast. And I reciprocated and brought him on this one because I thought it was really, really appropriate going forward. And I'm also in a few groups. I'm in a consulting group. I'm a mentor to a few entrepreneurs and startups. And within that's what they're looking at. They're looking at how do we develop a process so they can scale and grow. And HR has certainly always had systems in place, but I'm not sure they always had great processes. So we'll talk about what the difference is. And again, this is about either scaling up because you're still doing well, and there are businesses that are doing well, or it's about how do you come out of this how do you survive, how do you thrive in the post-pandemic? What's that going to look like? And so we'll be talking to Rhamy about that as well. Before we get too far, I want to make sure that we thank our sponsors, Zor.ai and Success Performance Solutions, for helping us be on the air. You'll hear a little bit more about them during the show. And a lot of things that are happening this week, in addition to the podcast tomorrow. For anyone who wants to join, I'm going to be the guest on a roundtable sponsored by JobSync. I know we've had quite a few people on those calls the last few weeks. And tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about how the job skill shortages have not gone away post-pandemic. A lot of people think that because we've got 40 plus million people that are unemployed, up double-digit unemployment rate, that it's just a lot easier to find people, and all the stuff that Keith and I and everybody else has been warning you about over the last few years just evaporated and it went away. And that's just not the that's just not the case at all. As I said, the COVID-19 did not infect people with a lot of new job skills. It just exposed them. So I know I got a chuckle out of that from Keith. So Keith, how are you doing?
I got to tell you, dude, to answer your question first, I'm doing fantastic. Thank you. Ira, it's so interesting thinking about the shift that happened to me along the way, where, we started this podcast together when we were both in HR, and now I've turned into more of the sales enablement world. But I got to tell you, one of the things that resonates with me more and more is how, just like what you were saying earlier, right? Like, having a system doesn't mean that you can scale. It could be an outdated system. And believe me when I tell you, I'm talking to senior level executives, CEOs. I'm talking to people that are trying to figure out how they can take advantage of the opportunity that's in front of them right now. And it's wild to me how, 18 months ago or almost 2 years ago, you and I started talking into our microphones. And here I'm seeing how big of a challenge it is, not just inside of HR, inside of sales organizations and inside of companies altogether. And it's go ahead.
No, you go, finish.
And it's really intriguing to me to see the difference in mindset between sales and HR, because for more, I hope the HR people that hear this get where I'm going with it and they don't take offense to it. But sales has always been about making change, and HR has been historically about managing compliance and personnel. And now we put it all together and we throw it out the COVID window, and we almost go back to the chalkboard to redesign how we go through business, redesign what our messages are, and whether or not the client is somebody who pays, a fee for ongoing services or an employee at a company. Leaders today need to figure out the right process, change the old habits, and scale and do it fast. And then they'll get ahead of the competition.
So I'm looking at here, I'm staring at the questions, and I know the one thing you said is that sales was always good, and then I had to think back, and this was probably you were a kid and I was still in school, but it used to be that IBM and Xerox were the sales teams. I mean, everybody tried to model their sales approach after Xerox and IBM. And basically, if you couldn't get a job there, you had a job for life, not only there, but you could take the skills you learned there and apply them. And then you look what happened to IBM and Xerox.
Yeah.
So sales has not always been at the top end, and there's certainly a lot of organizations now that are struggling with it. And again, they had a system, and they might have had some processes, and there is a slight difference. So I'm anxious to get kind of Rhamy's take on that. But going forward, it doesn't matter if you could have had the perfect, if there is such a thing as a perfect process, you could have had a perfect process 4 months ago. And today it's incompetent. You'd be incompetent. It's inefficient because really so much has changed. If you're still doing well, and fortunately, my business is, we were up over 50% last quarter, which is crazy. I mean, you talk about odd things. What seems odd during this time? I'm in the HR business. I'm in the hiring business. If people don't hire or promote people, I don't have business coming in. It's as simple as that. Even with the recruiting in the age of Googleization, if they're not hiring, they're not recruiting, and there's no business. And how the business is up that much is just, it's odd. I have a couple thoughts on it, but it's odd. It's odd that the stock market's at an all-time high, and so is unemployment. Hasn't been this high since the Great Depression, and yet the reason that they had a Great Depression then was because the stock market collapsed. Now we've got high unemployment, and the stock market's skyrocketing. How's that happen? we have civil unrest, social unrest. So there's so much going on. So there's a lot going on in the background. So as we talk about that, there's a couple questions that I'm going to keep throwing out, and I'm going to make this the theme going forward. And put everybody on the spot a little bit, but kind of what seems most odd. But one of the other questions is, and I think this goes back into how you apply this, is what seems odd because it doesn't fit into our mental map, into our mindset, or is it truly odd? And I think that's a tough question to answer. As even as I'm saying, it was really, really strange that the business is up or that unemployment's sky high and so is the stock market. Is it odd because it doesn't fit into what our worldview is, our views of what the future should look like? Or is it truly odd? And our response needs to be different. Because if it's just me, or it's just you, or it's just Rhamy, or just anybody listening out there that thinks that this is truly odd because it doesn't fit my world, well, then you need to change your world. If it's truly odd, I mean, if this is unprecedented and everybody's scrambling, then there lies a huge opportunity, not just to change, but there's opportunity
Absolutely.
out there because everybody's scrambling. So how you approach some of these things is going to be, really, really different. So I'm excited for that. So we're going to, that's sort of the framework where we're going to be having some of these discussions. And we have some really good people coming up for the rest of the month as well. Before we jump into that, as I mentioned, got this webinar tomorrow at 11 a.m. The best way to probably find that is go to my Twitter or LinkedIn feeds. I'm posting it out there. And again, we're going to be talking about how the labor market has not improved. Other than there's a lot more people applying, but how it has not improved just because we have this COVID. On Friday, and this is a new update, and she was a guest as well just about a year ago, is Heidi Spierge. Heidi is chief, no, she's more than vice president. She is the chief strategy and marketing officer for Cornerstone On Demand, who just recently bought out Saba. But when you talk about being one of the largest HR software platforms in the world, and they just acquire a huge competitor. And then over the course of a year, or the course of the last few months, think about how the pandemic has impacted everybody's HR HR systems, like on hiring and unemployment. And then you have basically a revolutionary move for diversity and inclusion in the process. So how do they help that? They've got thousands and thousands and thousands of clients that are all dealing with people, from payroll to recruitment to onboarding to learning. So she's my guest Friday, again, at 11 o'clock again. And you can get to that by going to crowdcast.io/Ira Wolf, crowdcast.io/Ira Wolf. So we have got two interesting conversations coming up this week, and we'll continue that. But one, we've got a great conversation as we invite our guest, Rhamy Alejeal, on. He, as I said, he's got a company, Poplar Financial, not Popular, Poplar Financial. And he wrote a book, a bestseller on Amazon, I believe it was last year, 2019, called People Processes. And that's his expertise, and especially, obviously, people processes, especially HR. And so welcome, Rhamy, to Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization.
I'm excited to be here. This is great.
So thank you. So let me start out a little bit, and then through the course of the conversation, we'll talk a little bit more about what you do and who you are and your business. But let's start out with that question. What have you found to be most odd during this time?
Well, I think the fact that we, hit 25% unemployment, but still had a tight labor market has got to be up there at the top. I don't think anyone would have predicted that given that sort of unemployment, we would have those issues. But with federal programs that highly incentivized, not coming to work, for health reasons. It was intentional. It's not like they were crazy. Put a lot of companies in a strange position, especially those that were most poised to take advantage of the crisis, and therefore they need to hire and grow. And now we've got a great opportunity. They're in a rough spot right now because they have excess demand and a rough supply when it comes to people. So I think that's got to be up there at the top. Other than that, I think the fact that the actual response of the government by itself has to be a highly unlikely thing. If you think cities, states, and even federal government is going to pass regulations that require the closure of mass swaths of the economy, if there had been odds taken on that 2 years ago, that also is just it is unfathomable, right? It's like if you were making your strategic vision January 1, it's like, how much should we weight the idea that the government just says, all the companies in this business, in the city that require face-to-face interaction, you can't be in business for 2 months. That's not high on that strategic forecasting plan. So I think those have got to be, it's an unusual world we're in because of those things.
And Rhamy, I like how you just like took it right there, because I wonder how much of that is going to actually change. There's no way that me or Ira would ever confess to be the super smart people in the room about stuff like this, right? But what we keep wondering is, when is it going to stop being? When are the plans going to stop shifting? And I think now, for the foreseeable future, it's going to be that much harder for businesses to actually figure out whether, like, I know I'm stumbling here because you got me all excited with that last thought. Like, how are they going to be able to figure out what's real and what's not going to move in the next 12 to 18 months, right?
Well, I think anytime we have mass disruption, I think back to 2001 and 9/11, right? We had a terrorist threat. We had not a threat, we had actuality. And even though it only hit the United States and New York, it affected everybody. Malls had trouble staying open, right? Because people didn't want to go to the mall. They were afraid they'd get blown up. Every school had to change its internal training. Even now, we have workplace violence drills and active shooter drills, which before 2001 were not an actuality in any sort of training, much less a strategic plan or something that, boards expected to make sure we have something in writing about what's going to happen, because no one considered that a threat. Right. We're simply moving into a new environment where there are at least two new, we call them morbidities, likelihoods of death. It's not a fun way to think about it, but we have one that is what happens when there's a virus or pandemic that can cause major disruption to business because people can get very, very sick from it. It's not something that we thought about in 2019, but 2020, for the next 20 years or longer even, it's going to be a standard part of your business plan. You're going to have to incorporate that additional risk factor. The other factor you're going to have to incorporate is, in the case of the government having the right or the ability or the likelihood of determining what businesses should stay open or not in a case like that, how do you position yourself in such a way that you're able to continue working? They're just threats. You have you can call Amazon a threat if you're a small business retailer. You can look at, like I said, terrorists and violence in 2001 to 2015 were everyone thought about it. It was part of a business plan. And now we have to think about the same. Cybersecurity is another example of a just constant expense, threat, likelihood of death, whatever you want to call it, that businesses have to incorporate in their planning. And while it feels very scary right now, and it is scary, as time goes on, it'll be something that we will have systems, processes, providers in place to make sure we navigate them well. So it's just another threat that we'll take care of.
And Rhamy, as you were talking about there, and again, I guess the challenge is that we look at those now is isolated things that we had 9/11, and we say we had a terrorist attack. Unfortunately, in almost 20 years, that's not occurred to that extent. Although the pandemic is taking as many lives every single day as 9/11 did. But we had that, and then we had the school shootings, and certainly more active shooter challenges, so there's both market factors and there's world factors, political factors that are taking place. Sure. But all this is happening at one time. I mean, the one thing that's not going to change is the pandemic. Even if we get a vaccine in January, or by the end of the year, 50% of the population's already said they're not going to take it, or accept it, and for whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but people are going to be cautious. The most vulnerable population, which is over 65, at least at this point, that seems to be changing, but the most vulnerable population for certainly long-term morbidity and mortality is anyone over 65. They're at risk. I mean, they may not even be the first population that's eligible for it, because there's always a risk the first time you do anything. So they still may be vulnerable. But on top of that, we still are going to have a risk of active shooters. We have a risk of terrorism. All these things are converging. We just seem to be throwing more ingredients into the pot.
I push back against the narrative that things are crazier now than ever. I appreciate the VUCA idea, but I think, there was a Cuban Missile Crisis, right? We've had businesses that succeeded through revolution, through civil war, true civil war, banking crises, that the Depression, which you can say was caused by a stock market crash or by a deflation of monetary policy in terms of our money supply. There's a lot of different ideas there. There are plenty of businesses that were around in 1910 that are still around. They may be different, they've grown, they've merged, but I would say that while everyone right now is very, they're afraid that this time is even crazier than the last, and I just don't think that's the case. We have more tools, we have more technology, we have better educated people than ever. We have broader skill bases than ever, and I feel confident that whether this pandemic is a 9/11 type event and we're not going to see anything like it for 20 or 30 or 50 years, or whether pandemics are something that's going to happen every 5 years going forward, we will adapt to it. And as a business leader, it works better to think, hey, our forefathers got through something just as crazy. The businesses that we've grown and loved and respected over the years face challenges every day as well. And we can adapt to it. And in the case of something like the pandemic, here's an excellent example of the adaptation of the market. If you right now were let's go to the old example of, like, you're starting up a business and you write your business plan and you go to a bank for a loan. Not that many people do that anymore, but let's say you did. If you were a retail store that's not going to be online for some reason, work face to face, or you're a plumbing shop that requires you go out and work in other people's homes face to face, the bank is much more likely to loan. Again, ignoring the internet for some reason, they're much more likely to loan to the plumbing house because they recognize that the government is very unlikely to shut that business down, even in the case of a pandemic, right? There's already a risk premium to a business that's non-essential. Attorneys' offices that work in criminal defense, believe it or not, have a premium now because those systems stay open even during pandemics versus those that work in civil suits. You're more likely to not be able to do your job, perform depositions, get time in court if you're an ambulance chaser versus a criminal defense attorney. So these slight shifts in the market are going to come because of this new reality, this new danger, but it's no different than many, many shifts that have happened in the last 100 years.
And I think what's really important with what you said, and I want to make sure this is clear to people, because when you first started talking and sort of said, hey, it was you weren't saying that VUCA will go away, the voluntary, uncertain, complex, and ambiguity.
No, I just think it's been around forever.
But people adapt to it. We change. We position it. We never went back to, we didn't go back to 1999 after 2001. We adapted to it. We changed the way we did things. It was still a pain in the butt until we stopped flying a couple months ago. We basically tolerated standing in line and taking off our shoes, and then they modified that a little bit. But we adjusted to all those things, and so I think I agree with you. But I know there's a lot of people that are still saying, when are we going to get back to normal? When are we going to go back to the way it was? And that's
never. And thank God.
Yeah. Right.
You got to push back. I mean, it's the people who are dreaming of the past, even if that past was just 5 months ago, are in the wrong. They're not thinking right. You've mentioned there's an opportunity here. There absolutely is. But even more so, it's never going back to the way it was. Just like after 9/11, I use 9/11 as a great example that disrupted business and changed business practices significantly. And it turns out that it was pretty much a black swan event. It was 20 years ago. Hopefully, Lord willing, it's not going to happen again, ever, period. But we adapted our business practices to prepare for it. And as time has gone along, we've decided, all right, this is less and less of a risk. But if 9/11 had happened, and then 9/16 happened, if we had another event like that we had to incorporate in a statistical manner that this is a more likely occurrence to happen. From a business perspective, there's a personal thing here. There's a patriotic thing. There's a religious thing. There's all those. But from a business perspective, what you have to do is go, that risk exists. It's more likely than I thought it was before, or it's less likely than I thought it was before. We're going to incorporate it into our plans and adapt to it.
And you are listening to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show, and our guest today is Rhamy Alejeal, having a fantastic conversation beyond the future of work, about what our future is, what seems odd, and the good news is it's odd, but we'll adapt to it, then this will seem normal at some point. But just to confirm, we're not going back to normal, but whatever is odd right now will become our new normal, and we're going to continue to move on. Rhamy has a lot of experience. He's actually, there's a webinar up in there which he could share. I believe it was a webinar or some instruction on even using PPP, but also has an interesting background, serves on the Federal Reserve's Industry Council on Healthcare. I know everybody's always concerned about employer costs, especially in the healthcare market. Another ruling today by the Supreme Court, which will affect healthcare as well. But as I said, you are listening to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization show here with myself, Ira Wolf, and Keith Campagna. You're going to hear from our sponsors, Zor.ai and Success Performance Solution. So stay right where you are. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Hiring top talent shouldn't be left up to the roll of the dice. And yet, that's exactly what many organizations do. They roll the dice, cross their fingers, and pray for a better outcome. Hiring the right employees the first time is much too important and way too costly to leave to a game of chance. Your employees and your customers deserve better. For 25 years, Success Performance Solution has been helping small and medium-sized businesses hire smarter. They offer pre-employment and leadership assessments from typing and data entry to C-suite competence. Whether it's production, sales, healthcare, call centers, or management, Success Performance Solutions can help. Visit their website at www.successperformancesolutions.com to schedule a free demo or call 800-803-4303.
Imagine how your company would grow if your candidate experience earned a 99% approval rating. Well, to get to 99%, you need the 3 best letters in recruitment technology, XOR. Zor's text bots, chat bots, and audio bots increased IKEA's candidate conversion rate 455%. Zor decreases candidate drop-off rates improves your candidate experience, and collects analytics for future strategies. To learn more, check out Xor.ai. It's XOR.ai.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show. I'm your host, Ira Wolf, with my co-host, Keith Compagna today, and our special guest is Rhamy Alejeal. We were talking in the first part of the show all about VUCA, voluntary, not very voluntary these days, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and how odd things were, but eventually odd will become the new normal, and then we'll look back at another event in the future of how odd that is. But we're moving forward. But Rhamy's specialty, kind of expertise, I wouldn't say specialty, but his expertise is in people processes. And so one of the things that I'd like to talk to you about, Rhamy, is, well, one is just kind of share a little bit. What do you do in your spare time when you're not doing podcasts? I was on your. I know you have you have a podcast, and I was on yours a couple. I don't think it aired yet, but we recorded it. You're on mine, and I know you interview some interesting people. But you do have a job. You just don't do podcasts. So what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, I'm the founder and CEO of People Processes, same name as the book. We are a outsourced HR organization, so we help companies design, implement, and even if needed, run on a day-to-day basis the ins and outs of their HR processes. And we kind of break those into kind of specific life cycle events for employees, along with what we call the people processes. And those are things like recruiting, onboarding, development, performance management, strategic management. We take a look into the offboarding process, which I think is probably one of the most important processes that's often overlooked. We talk about it. We work and have a full system for compliance that includes audits and checking these sorts of things. And we work with about 200 companies across the United States. So that's what I do on my day job. I run a team that's really handling that most days in and out. I get to spend 4 or 5 hours on that, and then a couple hours creating content. Outside of work, I'm a total nerd. I'm on the Economics Council, as you mentioned, with the Federal Reserve of St. Louis, where we discuss healthcare. I spend my evenings with my new baby, but also I love to read the American Economics Journal. I read a lot of, for example, the Supreme Court decision you mentioned that came out this morning. I've already read the dissenting opinion, haven't read the majority, but I read almost every opinion of the Supreme Court. And that's what I love to do on my evenings and Saturday mornings, believe it or not, is Supreme Court readings. I got addicted in high school listening to the arguments, and now I read the rulings.
That is pretty geeky.
Oh, yeah.
So Rhamy, obviously this is a great time. This is a time to reflect. Now there's some businesses that are just going crazy. I mean, they're just super busy, especially those in the PPP business and pharma. But there are businesses that are doing really well, and there's other ones that are taking this time a breather. And they're taking this time to reflect on what do we need to change. And I've had a lot of discussions in many different forums with people that are starting to document what they do in the process, and whether it be, hey, I've had a couple conversations with clients or potential clients. As they reopen, they might have had 100 employees or they had 600 employees. I was on the call, hopefully they'll invite me over, was actually in the island of Maldives, a resort. They've been closed down. They're going to open in September. They had 200 employees. They're going to hire 50 people back to start. And they're saying we're re-looking at our processes. So this was really timely. And they were looking at testing. So where does someone start? I'm sure they can pick up the phone and call you or email you and reach out and go, hey, we're ready to redo our process. But what should a company do? If they're not thinking about it, number one is if they're not thinking about it, they should. Second is, what's the next step? So, hey, we need help. We need to relook at this. What's the first step that
Well, forgetting about working with us directly, there's a couple of kind of myths or ideas around HR that we want to push back against, we want to dispel. Keith earlier said, hey, HR's compliance focused or, employee paperwork focused, this stuff you got to do to stay out of jail. And, I'm not going to disagree that that's a part of the job. But what most companies overlook is that their HR should be their labor multiplier. If you're going to spend, $100,000 a month on your labor pool, how much of that can you spend to multiply the effectiveness of that labor? For example, if you're spending $100,000 a month on your payroll and you spent no money, $0, paying attention to how the employee is onboarded, compliance, what sort of performance management you put in place, how the employees are offboarded when they're terminated, you're not even getting $100,000 worth of labor out compared to the rest of the market.
Right.
Spending a minimal amount on HR, if you're spending none, gives you outsized returns. So I often tell companies to take a look, and our goal is to identify quickly the 20% of HR crap that they can get done that'll get them 80% of the way there, right? That Pareto optimality. We want to go in there and take a look at the way we do it, and ours is a little bit more complex than maybe a small business owner would do internally, but we start by identifying each of these primary interaction points between the employee and the company: recruiting, onboarding, what we call performance management, so goal setting, that kind of thing. Then we go on to compensation and benefits, payroll, timekeeping, offboarding, and a few other kind of, we've laid out about 8 of them that we go through, and we see what you're doing now. Now, from an internal perspective, if you're a small business owner listening and you're thinking, all right, I'm spending this money on labor, how do I get more out of it? How do I either get people who just suddenly know more or are better able to do things? Take that list and recruiting is, I think, a big part of it, but start with onboarding. And think about what your goal is from onboarding. Start with, this is just one good example. If you look at your employee pool, you can internally connect it to the same mindset you use when you get a client. A lot of business owners, Keith, are more comfortable thinking in that sales mentality, right? So we spend a lot of money marketing. Then we sell them. We do qualification in that sales process to make sure they're even a marginally appropriate fit. We spend a lot of time bringing them through it, and then we make the close, and suddenly they're our client. That's the sales process. When you think about the recruiting process, it's very similar. You're marketing through job advertisements. You want to make sure you're marketing to the correct place, to the correct people. When they apply, you then go through an interview process, very similar to the sales process. And then finally, yes, you've hired them. You got the person. Great. Imagine it was a client, and then the first thing you did after you got the client is you sent them via mail a stack of 300 black and white, kind of funky looking copy pages and ask them to fill that out so we can get started with what we sold you on.
Right. Sounds like a mortgage process.
Right? When you look at your people, it's similar. Onboarding is a process that in many, many companies out there, you've spent a ton of time building up, finding the correct employee, qualifying them, selling them on the job, closing them, and now they're starting, and you've put nearly no effort into that onboarding experience. So the way to do this is get out a piece of paper, small business owner, write your onboarding process. It's totally okay if that onboarding process is they show up to work and then they walk around following me while I talk about random things. Totally fine, right? But write it out. Write it down on a piece of paper. When you're done writing out vaguely what you do now, and I'm not asking you to be like super detailed. We use Form LB22 and then we generally outline it. Draw a line, and now I want you to write the word goal. This process of onboarding should have a goal. If your goal is to get them to sign pieces of paper, and that's it, well, you probably have a decent process. You got all your pieces of paper signed. But if your goal of onboarding is to, as quickly as possible, move this new client, this new employee from enthusiastic to come to work to actually useful to the organization to the extent that they know their job, they know what to do, and perhaps most importantly, that uber goal, that BHAG, that we're going to go one step further is not only do they know their job, but they can be trusted to make the decisions about their job for which we have no processes or guidance. That's the way we define our onboarding process at our company and for many of our clients. Onboarding is the process by which we take someone from enthusiastic to competent to trustworthy. And that's how we define it. If you write that goal out and look at what you wrote above it in terms of your process, most business owners and HR people aren't stupid. They're going to look at it and they're going to go, okay, we got to change our process a little bit, right? We need to make a tweak here or there or completely redo the darn thing to accomplish our goal. And that's how we look at each of the people processes. We go through, we identify what is the goal of this process. We look at what you're doing now, and then we make tweaks and changes over time to improve them. That's the beauty of a process, that you can make changes over time to consistently improve. So I would say for your business owners out there listening, pick one of those: performance management, onboarding, strategic management, offboarding. Is your job to not get sued? Is that your goal? Well, there's probably a good couple steps in there you need to work on. But maybe your goal of offboarding is to learn where in the prior people processes you screwed up. Because you did. Just like if you had a client who came on board, you spent a ton of time and effort marketing to them, selling them, onboarding them, providing your service, and then they left you for a competitor, you want to know why. Even if you had to fire them because they're a terrible client, turns out this was not a good fit at all. Well, guess what? You have a problem in your sales or marketing processes. You didn't qualify correctly. There's something you can go back and improve. Business owners understand this intuitively, but when an employee leaves, they go, that guy was a butthead. That's my answer. The root cause analysis.
A millennial. Those hard millennials.
Right. Under 40, X amount, done. Right. So that's the same thing. Look at each one of your processes and figure out what the goal is that you have, perhaps improve upon that goal, and then examine your processes to fix it. That's all we do over and over and over. And we use tech, enterprise level stuff to make it more and more automated so that we can spend more time improving the processes rather than actually doing them. But in effect, the whole secret is to think of your employees just like you do your clients and be concerned when they leave, concerned when you have to fire them, and figure out where you made a mistake in a prior process.
And that sounds like a lot of work. It's a good thing everybody comes to work in the same building anymore. That makes it a lot easier, huh?
I will say this, speaking of things that have changed, one of the biggest opportunities here from COVID is it has broken the taboo of requiring a fancy smancy office. People have already decided. I've got a 150-person law firm with a couple hundred support people. They had to go work from home. They have been work from home now for like 4 months. We just did a couple of consistent surveys, and you know what? 80% of them would rather work from home than come back to the office. Mm-hmm. This is a company with tens of thousands of dollars a week in office expenses.
Oh, yeah.
They're quite pleased to hear this.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be in the commercial real estate business right now.
I feel you.
So, well, we already started seeing there are, I had conversations with an entrepreneur, business owner a few months ago, and we're already seeing that the retail stores around malls are going to be turned into apartments.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like, it's really fascinating, the mini micro cities inside of cities.
No, absolutely.
That's just the tip of the iceberg.
So I've got. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's absolutely it. Again, the businesses will adapt. In a thought of those of you who are thinking about going from home and the opportunity that this presents, going to a recruiting thought like Ira's very concerned with, many companies are going to continue, despite not needing it, to funnel ridiculous amounts of money into their office spaces. Fine. It's a mistake for many of them. Not for all of them. Some companies still need it. I'm with you. But many of them are going to continue to put there. Imagine if they took half that budget and put it into setting employees up at home. The competitive advantage that would come from recruiting with You don't have to come into the office. Well, you're already among a minority of companies, or maybe a majority soon, that says you can work from home. Cool. You don't think a competitive point is going to be when you work from home for us, we're paying for your internet. We're going to send you the best new laptop. You're going to get a great camera. We're going to make sure you have a good mic set up. We're going to pay for a cleaning service to come out to your house, whatever it is. I don't know. Whatever you can do to differentiate yourself in that market is going to be a differentiation. It's going to be a new thing people compete on for labor. It'll be interesting. I was talking to a very large real estate developer, and he was arguing that in 10 years, he thinks the standard home real estate listing is not going to be 3-bed, 2-bath. It's going to be 3-bed, 2-bath, 1 office, 3-bed, 2-bath, 2 office. The work from home revolution is going to hugely affect how many things are done in the business world. And it's going to affect trends also in the residential real estate market.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Hey, I'm already there. Keith, you've been in my office, so we're already there. And now if we get the path cleaned
out. It's wild to think, Ira, if you go back to way in the before time, like April, when this first happened, the only question that I could get out of my mouth was, what's this going to do when they find out nobody's going back to the offices? To me, that was, Rhamy, that was the thing that just shot to my head. It wasn't like, the healthcare system would take care of the COVID, infection, but I was sitting here for days wondering, how is this going to impact all the moving pieces of business? And here we are talking about it like it's, here we go.
We're already adapting. And so we're coming up pretty close to the end of the show, and I do want to give Rhamy time to kind of how people can get in touch with him. But one of the disadvantages of just having audio and not video is that you couldn't see me. But I was smiling, Rhamy, as you were going through the onboarding process. And there is something called, I stole this from a friend of mine, Judy Studer, and she had the life cycle of an employee, where employees start out highly motivated but not yet competent. And then they move into the second stage, which is highly motivated and competent. That's where you want everybody to be. But over time, they become demotivated but still competent. And eventually, if you let them go long enough, they become demotivated or unmotivated and not so competent. So as you moved people through, as that person comes on the first day, highly animated, highly enthusiastic, but not yet ready to skill, is how do you move them to stage 2 really quickly? It just brought back, I've known Judy for 25 years, and that was one of the first things she taught me, and it still holds true. So for people to do that, to help companies go from stage 1 to stage 2, how did they get a hold of you, Rhamy?
Well, we work with companies of all sizes, but our average client has 120 employees. We're actually launching right now, July 1 was our first date, our fully outsourced HR departments for sub 10-man companies. Which is a flat $1,000 a month right now, where we'll come in and do everything from those audits we discussed. We're going to look at each of the people processes, create processes, and even execute them on a day-to-day basis for companies. So that's our current extreme promotion. We're very excited to see it. And we think we're going to see a lot of people take us up on it that maybe wouldn't have in the past, because it's changed, right? You can't bring people into your office and have them just sit next to Sally's desk and listen to what she does. So you need the processes to bring these things up to date. You can reach me at peopleprocesses.com. LinkedIn is Rhamy Alejeal. We're on Facebook, Instagram, everything at People Processes. In general, a lot of small companies are right now, they're in a position where they're trying to scale or they're trying to adapt to this new reality, but they need to adapt their operations to the new reality, their sales to the new reality, their marketing to their new reality, heck, their finance systems to the new reality. How are people going to freaking buy lunch? That kind of thing.
How are they going to get up in the elevator?
There you go. Your HR operations, we want to either help you in terms of, we have different kind of levels, but larger companies, a lot of times they got a great HR staff. They just need support, guidance, and the tools from a technology perspective to automate a lot of these things. Once you put the processes in place, we can help there. And for small businesses that want to do it for me solution, we've got that as well. Again, that's at peopleprocesses.com.
Very easy. Rhamy, this was fantastic. I wasn't sure. My wife asked who my guest was today, and it was like people processes. And it was sort of that. But this was this was a great conversation. It was fun, and again, as most people, I've got a ton of other things I'd love to talk about. So hopefully you'll come back on the show in a few months, and we can continue the conversation.
I look forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Hey, and Keith, any real quick?
Keep listening, keep working, people, and anyone who's out there, realize that when you feel stressed because there's so much change, shut off the news, breathe, maybe listen to a podcast about mindfulness, and don't worry. Like Rhamy said, this happened kind of before, it'll kind of happen again. I think if the internet proved anything, it's if you have the right technology, all you need is a hotspot and you could get work done.
Yeah. And thanks again to Zor.ai and Success Performance Solution for helping us be here. If you want to re-listen to this, you can go up to our website, Geeks Geezers Googleization, or just got the new domain, Keith, besthrpodcast.com. The besthrpodcast.com. Yeah, I can't believe it was available. Don't forget to join us each week, every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time on W4CY.com. Or you can catch the podcast, as I mentioned, on Apple, Google, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next week, Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization, this is Ira Wolf and Keith Compagna. Don't let the shift hit your plans.